You're listening to Superpowers of the Soul on the Superpower Up Podcast, the show that elevates superpowers to the divine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Jennifer Urezzio, superpower expert and founder of Soul Language, and this is Superpowers of the Soul. And I am excited to talk to Nikki Shields today, and we're going to be talking about spiritual support by writing. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Me too. Very exciting. And you guys are probably going to hear a lot of the background noise today because there's construction going on. Shocker.
Oh, boy.
But I always like to start with my fundamental question, which is, what do you consider the superpower of your soul?
Well, my soul's superpower is holding space. And so this first kind of came up for me several years ago in a conversation with a friend who said, but you're a space holder. And at the time I was, I was feeling a little insecure and I was like, you mean like I'm just a placeholder? And she said, no. You really hold space for other people to blossom in what they're doing. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I worked with that a little bit and I can see how that's the case. And that's kind of drawing me towards my newest evolution of my work, which is as a transformational retreat leader. Holding space.
So often, master healers and profound transformational individuals, when I ask that question, they go outside of themselves along with the question around sacred purpose. So I'm going to ask it again in a different way. What do you consider the superpower of your soul for yourself?
Ooh, for myself, it's holding space, but for my creative work and how that connects me with the divine and the divine feminine in particular.
See, so, God, I love that.
Yeah, right?
That's like all juicy. We can play with that. I think so often, I'm a master of service, you're a master of service, and we're so, here's how we support others. And I think it's really important that, Superman flies, but he flies so he can get to one place quicker than the other for himself. Yes, and then he saves all the people, blah, blah, blah. But the flying's really Superman's gig for himself, right?
Yeah.
I think so often there's this kind of, there's a more ability to enjoy our own superpower for ourselves because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to experience the bliss of being this individualization of the one. So I love your answer.
Well, absolutely. And I love how you refined it because actually I had to do that for myself first before I can do that for anybody else, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fundamental thing I think most healers don't understand is that, and most people, that, when I'm going to talk about your sacred purpose in a moment, your sacred purpose is first for yourself and then for other people. And so often when we are always focused on our external, we're missing a lot of bliss and a lot of goo and a lot of peace and a lot of amazing stuff for ourselves because we're just, I had a photographer teacher and he'd be like, that's a great photo, but the brilliant photo is 1 inch over. Ooh. And I think the, focusing on external allows us to be in a good photo, but not a great photo.
Yeah, for sure.
So what do you consider your sacred purpose? Like, what are you fundamentally here to experience and then offer that experience to others?
My soul purpose is creating magic with words, and in particular, the written word. And that's been something that I've been drawn to ever since I was a very, very small little girl. And I journeyed in a way that kind of took me away from that for quite some time, but then it always kept coming back. So
I think that happens with a lot of highly creative people. I think that they have this, I was a kid with the typewriter, doing the newsletter for the blog.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, through the growing up process, through the schooling process, if it's not properly nurtured, we sidestep it in order to fit in or, to create a life that's harmonious or like I did, you think you're one kind of artist because you're afraid to be the other kind of artist, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Other, right, creative beings. So how did you what was kind of the journey about getting you back, not that you were ever off purpose, but getting you back on purpose?
Um, it wound up just being this calling. So my sidestep was kind of being told in school and by my dad in particular that, well, you can't make a living as a writer, which we know is not true because people do that. And also, in today's day and age with self-publishing and all, it's much more possible. But anyway, I was sort of led along that path and I followed it and went into broadcasting instead and had this lovely career for quite a few years in public radio. And I loved the people. They were awesome. The public radio is such a great, ethical place to work for. They're doing good work in the world. But it just wasn't satisfying. And I just kept getting called and called back to writing. And eventually I just had to answer. It was imperative that I answer that call. And
so what did that call feel like? How did that take shape? I think it's really important that people understand what that sacred purpose or, some of the ways that you can get called. I mean, sometimes it is trumpets and sometimes it is the big gold ticket moments and sometimes it is the 2x4 over the head. But sometimes it's a lot. That's everything falling off my desk. Yay!
Oh, yikes.
But sometimes it's much subtler than that. So what was some of the ways that it called to you?
Well, in my case, it was subtle. I had this, on paper, great career. I had my 2 children who I absolutely adore, but it felt like something was missing. And I also had, and this is something I hear from a lot of people in my life, is I had this voice in the back of my head that I call the muses that just kept saying, well, what about this idea that you had for a book? And what about this idea that you wanted to write about? And it just kept kind of whispering to me. And in the course of being a busy mom and a career woman, I didn't have the time or energy for a long time to pursue much of that. Now, what I did was I wrote a column for, actually, I'm a pagan priestess, and so I wrote a column for a back in the day of the stapled together and mailed around newsletter before the internet was as prevalent as it is now, as far as blogs and stuff. And I wrote that column every 6 weeks or so, just a short thing, but talking about the seasons and how I connected with the earth and nature and things like that and how I lived my life. And that ended up becoming my first book, which was a collection of essays. So
before we do our break here in a moment, how does your soul support others? I mean, you mentioned a couple of them throughout our bit of a conversation already, but what it kind of is the ongoing everyday, how your soul support others, examples of your life?
Well, just over the past couple of years, my business, so I had started a business and it has evolved to become, I do what I call being a book midwife. And so I don't necessarily help people who already consider themselves writers, because if you say you're a writer, then you're writing. But if you're like I was and you just have that muse whispering these book ideas in the back of your head and you don't know how to start, that's what I help with.
Beautiful. So before we do our break here, how do people get in touch with you? How do they find out more about you and everything that you offer out into the world?
They can come to my website, which is Nikki Starcat Shields. So it's Nikki Starcat Shields.com.
Beautiful. Okay, everyone, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about spiritual support by writing.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Dawn Rekla, Executive Director of SuperPower Experts, and we want to thank each of you for making SuperPower Up the #1 podcast network for personal development and spiritual growth. Because people like you have the courage to say that mindfulness, healthy living, disrupting reality, the pursuit of consciousness, responsible entrepreneurship, and radical parenting matter, we now amass over 1 million downloads monthly in more than 90 countries. Our numbers keep growing because there are far more people willing to live divergently than mass media wants to acknowledge. For you, the change makers, the light bearers, the way showers, we say thank you. If you're ready to take the next step in your evolution, go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the Superpower quiz. And as Neva Lee Rekla, our youngest podcaster, likes to remind us, Remember, we all have superpowers and we can change the world.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Jennifer Urezzio. This is Superpowers of the Soul, and I'm with Nikki Shields today, and we are talking about spiritual support by writing. So I love this topic, and I think people do this a lot by journaling, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the number way people, I'm not a big journaler, kind of roll my eyes at journaling, right? But when I go to write a newsletter or a blog or something, I think for me, a lot of that spiritual awareness happens as I write. What would you suggest someone get started on about really tapping within through their writing?
Well, one of my very favorite ways to get someone who's maybe reluctant or uncertain about their writing into that writing flow, because there is like a flow state that you can get into where you're being really creative and your writing is coming from your soul onto the page. And so if you've ever experienced any kind of creativity, it doesn't have to be writing, where you could be painting or knitting or anything, where you're just in that flow, then what you were doing is you were really aligned with your soul. So I like to give this example. There's in the reclaiming pagan tradition, there's something known as the triple self. So first of all, there's talking self, which is like the way we're talking to one another right now. The way that you, the listener, are hearing this is like pretty much like your left brain, your conscious awareness. The second one is younger self, and that's centered more, I see it as centered in your heart. It can be, you can think of an image of yourself as a young child, or just that part of you, the right brain creative self that loves beautiful things and ritual and, the smell of the incense, the burning of candles and that sort of thing. And then the third one is deep self. And I think of that as like your gut knowing, and that's like your deep inner wisdom that's connected to the spirit. And in order for those to be aligned, talking self can't communicate directly with that deep self. It needs the intermediary of your younger self. So in order to have when you're creating and you're in the flow, all of those are aligned. And in order to get there, what I love to suggest to people is be playful, appeal to that younger self, have some kind of ritual where you sit down with your favorite beverage and your playlist of music that you love, and light your candle and maybe have a crystal, and just really appeal to that younger self, because then that allows you to get aligned with your deep self and let the writing or whatever creativity you're doing kind of flow through you.
Beautiful. Why do you think that's so important to be aligned and connect spiritually to oneself?
Well, when we're trying to write just from just our talking self, our awakened left brain self, we fight ourselves because we're trying to make it perfect. If you've ever written something, and you mentioned like a newsletter, if you've ever written something and tried to edit it at the same time, it's really, really hard to do, because creativity is very much like spirituality. It's big and vast. I picture it like a sacred wellspring that we can dip into. And if we're really restricting that flow down to just what our conscious mind can handle, we're making it harder for ourselves to do it. And if we're trying to edit at the same time as we're writing, it's you probably know it's just painstakingly difficult.
Yeah, I think so often when I ask someone what their soul is saying, and there's a bit of a pause, and I go, "Are you kind of like, editing or judging what your soul is saying?" There's this kind of yes, and I'm like, "Well," they're like, "Well, I don't understand." I was like, "Well, just tell me, explain or express what you heard or felt. Then we can ask more questions to get a more detailed answer or to make sense of it." And I think so often we try to be, perfectly human, that we, and to understand everything, that we're missing like the pure joy and the pure rhythm of it. And I always tell people, if you're going to start writing, put your iPhone on, hit the little button that says speaker, the microphone, and just talk for a couple of minutes, and then go back and look at it. And I think so often that gives them a sense of freedom, because they're not trying to make it sound anything. And I think as you're writing for spiritual connection, like you said, I think that's key. You can't censor that, because then you're missing a whole lot of really good information.
Yeah, and there's plenty of time to edit it down later and to sort of make it polished later. If I could suggest too, if you know how to touch type, if you can type without looking at the keys, just open a blank document and close your eyes and kind of ask yourself a question, and then just touch type and don't even think about whether you're spelling things right. Just go and let it flow out.
That's so weird. Like, I took typing, I'm going to be 50, but I took typing in high school. Mm-hmm. And the thought that, what, they don't teach type, like they should, because they're usually like, it's just so weird how, even in writing, we've evolved and, we're doing things different, and how, that simple, you need to look at your keys versus could really slow you down. And I think one of the things that people don't do is, and I recommend it, is actually get out a pen and touch the note, like be tangible and feeling with it. I think we tend to be a little far removed from things.
Yeah, and if you have like sparkly pens and a beautiful notebook, you're also tapping into your younger self's love of beauty and sensuality, and your hand on the page and that music playing. I mean, you can really, once you tap into that, for me, it's like this weight off my shoulders. Like I feel myself just relaxing into it.
Yeah, you know me well about my sparkly notebook and my
cool.
And Warner and I was like, he's like, I noticed that you gave me the red pen and not the blue or black. I was like, yeah, like when I write, I need a blue or black. Like I really need a black pen.
Yeah.
Which is so, because we were never allowed to use it in school. We were only allowed to use blue. Which is, it settles me in. It makes me feel solid. And it starts that process off, and I know I'm off on a magic carpet ride.
Yeah. Another thing that I love is many of you have probably heard of or read Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. Yeah. And she suggests doing once a week. I don't do it as often as once a week, but at least a couple times a month, doing what she calls an artist date. And this is just taking yourself out somewhere into the world. And I love to go to like art museums and just look around, and you're just getting input, positive input, that's then going to kind of filter through your mind and become whatever art you create in the world. And so looking at art for me, or going out to listen to music, or, it doesn't have to cost anything, going out for a nature walk, all of that input really feeds that inner wellspring for me and allows my writing to be more inspired.
Yeah, and she also has another book called The Writer's Life, so you could check out both of those. So before I ask my last question here, how do people get in touch with you again?
They can go to my website, Nikki, StarcatShields.com. I'm also on Facebook as Nikki Starcat Shields. I'm probably the only one with Starcat in my name, so you can find me on Facebook as well.
Beautiful. So if you were a magnet on whatever you call your higher powers refrigerator, what would your magnet say?
Ooh, it would say, trust your inner wisdom.
Nice. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation today, and thank you so much for spending your time with us, not writing, but talking.
No problem.
And if you liked what you heard today, you can connect with me and all the other experts in the Superpower Net at superpowerexperts.com/the net. Thank you all. Don't forget to find your connection, be your connection, and now you can write your connection. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the Superpower Quiz today.